Bactria, 329 BC. Imagine a man, once a powerful governor who commanded vast territories, now being dragged through dusty, sun-scorched streets. His face is a swollen mask of dried blood and filth after days of nonstop torture. The crowd smells blood and they press in, a sea of hostile faces, hungry to see what comes next. This is Bessus, the man who murdered his own king and had the audacity to declare himself ruler of the mighty Persian Empire. Now, at the direct command of Alexander the Great, he's about to face one of the most horrifying deaths known to the ancient world. It's a slow, agonizing execution designed to stretch pain over hours, maybe even days. How did a man with so much power fall so far, so fast? What crime could possibly warrant such a spectacular and gruesome end? And what terrifying message was Alexander sending to the world with this act of calculated brutality? To understand how Bessus ended up on a sharpened stake, we have to rewind to the final, desperate days of the Persian Empire under King Darius III. The year is 331 BC. Alexander of Macedon, a brilliant and terrifyingly ambitious young general, has just demolished the Persian army at the Battle of Gaugamela. It was a catastrophic defeat. In the aftermath, Darius, the once omnipotent king of kings, was forced to abandon his capitals, his treasures, and most of his authority, fleeing east into the rugged heartlands of his own empire. As Darius retreated, his power just crumbled. He was a king on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder for the relentless Macedonian conqueror who was swallowing his empire piece by piece. And in the ancient world, weakness was an invitation for predators. Watching this all unfold with a keen and opportunistic eye was one of Darius's own men, Bessus, the satrap of Bactria. Bessus was a Persian nobleman and a member of the Achaemenid ruling dynasty who controlled one of the empire's most remote and formidable regions. At Gaugamela, he had commanded the Persian left wing, fighting fiercely against Alexander's army. He wasn't a coward, but more than anything, he was an opportunist. He looked at his king not as a leader to be defended to the death, but as a roadblock to his own ambition. The sight of a defeated, exhausted Darius sparked a dangerous idea in Bessus's mind. Why follow a loser when he could seize power for himself? By the winter of 331 BC, Bessus started to conspire. He wasn't alone. He found allies in other disillusioned Persian nobles, like the high-ranking official Nabarzanis. Their plan was as simple as it was treacherous. They would get rid of the liability Darius had become and take control. Their first thought was to capture Darius and use him as a bargaining chip with Alexander, hoping it would secure their own positions in the new world order. In mid-330 BC, as Alexander's forces closed in, the conspirators made their move. They arrested their own king. Darius III, the last true heir of Cyrus the Great, was bound in golden chains, a final mocking nod to his royal status, and tossed into a covered wagon. As the Macedonians drew closer, panic set in. The conspirators realized their plan to use Darius as a pawn was falling apart. There was no time to negotiate. Near modern-day Damgan, Iran, they gave Darius an ultimatum: fight to the death. When the king, summoning one last shred of defiance, refused, Bessus and his co-conspirators made their fateful choice. They stabbed him repeatedly, leaving him for dead in the cart on the side of a dusty road. A lone Macedonian soldier discovered the dying King of Kings shortly after. He had just enough breath left to curse his betrayers before he died. For Bessus, this wasn't murder. It was a promotion. He immediately declared himself the new king of kings, taking the royal name Artaxerxes V. He thought he'd made a brilliant strategic move. By eliminating the failed king, he could rally the eastern provinces and present himself to Alexander as the new power to be dealt with. He gravely, catastrophically, misread his opponent. When news of the assassination reached Alexander, his reaction wasn't relief. It was pure rage. To Alexander, Darius had been a legitimate king, a worthy adversary. He was the ultimate prize, and Bessus, a mere subordinate, had stolen that prize. To see his rival cut down by his own treacherous nobles was an unforgivable insult, a violation of the sacred laws of kingship. Alexander gave Darius's body a royal funeral, burying him with all the honors befitting a king. And he swore a solemn oath. He would hunt Bessus to the ends of the earth. This was no longer just a war of conquest. Now, it was a personal vendetta. From that day on, Bessus, the self-proclaimed Artaxerxes V, became the most wanted man in the known world. Any hope of gaining favor with Alexander had vanished. He was no longer a potential partner. He was a regicide, a traitor, and Alexander's most hated enemy. The Macedonian king paused other campaigns, pouring immense resources into the hunt. Bessus fled east, back to his home territory of Bactria, a land of rugged mountains and fierce tribes in what is now parts of Afghanistan and its neighbors. He thought its unforgiving terrain would protect him. He rallied local forces and began waging a bitter guerrilla war, hoping to bleed Alexander's army dry in the harsh landscape. But Bessus had underestimated Alexander's obsessive determination. The Macedonian army, veterans of countless campaigns, didn't falter. They crossed the snow-covered Hindu Kush mountains in a feat that stunned the local population and pushed relentlessly into the heart of Bessus's territory. For months, the chase continued across Bactria and into the even more remote region of Sogdia. The pressure was immense. As Alexander advanced, Bessus's support began to collapse. His own men, Sogdian officers like Spidomenes and Datafernes, saw the writing on the wall. This was a war they couldn't win. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was an unstoppable force of nature. Just as Bessus had betrayed his king, his own allies now prepared to betray him. In the summer of 329 BC, they made their move. They seized Bessus, the man who had dreamed of an empire, and handed him over to the Macedonians. The manhunt was over. The Macedonian general Ptolemy, on Alexander's explicit orders, had Bessus stripped naked, placed in a wooden collar, and left by the side of the road for the entire passing army to see. It was the ultimate humiliation for a man who had called himself a king. Finally, the prisoner was brought before the conqueror. Alexander, just 27 years old but already a hardened veteran, looked over the man who had caused him so much trouble. He asked Bessus why he had betrayed and murdered Darius. Bessus, clinging to one last shred of pride, tried to justify his actions, claiming it was a joint decision among the nobles. Alexander was unmoved. According to the historian Arrian, he ordered Bessus to be flogged publicly. Then, he commanded a punishment that was both a Persian tradition and a terrifying statement. Bessus's ears and nose were cut off. This was a classic Achaemenid punishment for traitors, a physical mark of dishonor that identified the criminal to all who saw him. By using a Persian punishment, Alexander wasn't acting like a foreign invader, but as the legitimate successor to the Persian throne, enforcing its ancient laws. But this mutilation was only the beginning. For the crime of killing a king, Alexander had something far more terrible in mind. He pronounced the final sentence. The chosen method of execution was deeply symbolic. It was meant to be more than a death. It was a message carved in flesh and blood. The event was staged as a massive public spectacle. The entire Macedonian army and thousands of local Bactrians were gathered to witness it. Alexander addressed the crowd, recounting Bessus's crimes, betraying his king, the cowardly murder, and the arrogant attempt to steal a throne. He declared that even in war, there is honor. Betrayal from within, Alexander proclaimed, violated both human and divine law. His speech finished, the executioners moved in. The ancient sources actually conflict on the precise method, which shows just how much this event horrified people at the time. One account by the historian Arrian says he was decapitated. Another, from Quintus Curtius, claims he was crucified at the very spot where he had murdered Darius. Perhaps most gruesome of all, Plutarch wrote that Bessus was torn apart by two bent trees. The trees would be forced toward each other, the victim tied to both. And then they'd be released, ripping the body apart as they sprang back. Whatever the method, the goal was the same: to maximize suffering and make an unforgettable example of him. Under the brutal Bactrian sun, Bessus paid the price for his ambition. The screams and eventual silence of the man who killed Darius served as the final, horrifying confirmation of Alexander's absolute power. The death of Bessus marked a turning point. With him gone, the last organized Persian resistance in the eastern provinces crumbled, allowing Alexander to consolidate his control and march even further into Central Asia. He had successfully positioned himself as the avenger of Darius, the legitimate heir to the Persian Empire who upheld its traditions of justice against traitors. Yet, the event also revealed a darker shift in Alexander's own character. The calculated cruelty of the execution, his use of punishments his own Greek soldiers considered barbaric, and his personal observation of the suffering signaled a change. He was becoming more like the absolute despotic rulers he had replaced. The historian Arrian, an admirer of Alexander, still criticized the excessive severity of the punishment, seeing it as a sign that the conqueror was adopting the cruel customs of the East. The story of Bessus is a brutal cautionary tale. It's the story of a man whose ambition outstripped his wisdom, who betrayed his king to seize an empire, only to end his days in agony under the watchful eye of the conqueror he had fatally misjudged. His gruesome end was a message that echoed through the ancient world. Loyalty to a king, any king, was sacred, and betrayal would be met not just with death, but with an agony designed to be remembered for generations.